Hey guys, so in today's video we are covering what if Qui-Gon Jinn fell in love with Shmi Skywalker. This is part 2 however, but I have added part 1 at the beginning of the video for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I will also leave a timestamp on the video for when part 2 starts, so skip ahead if you've already seen part 1. I hope you all enjoy and may the Force be with you. Before we start, I would like to say a huge thank you to our members Connor, Itmar and Crystal. If you would like to become a member, the link is below. Our story begins on Tatooine, where Qui-Gon and Anakin meet. Qui-Gon immediately realizes that he is the chosen one, based on his high midi-chlorian count and connection to the Force. But it isn't Anakin who snatches his attention, but instead Anakin's mother, Shmi Skywalker. Qui-Gon was mesmerized by her. He had never felt such a strong connection about another being ever before. He was trained to suppress that part of himself that loved and cared for others, but Shmi shattered that wall down. For days on end they talked endlessly, getting to know each other and falling deep in love. He didn't know exactly what made her different, except the way he felt when he was around her. He never wanted to let this feeling go away ever again. When it came time to continue his duties as a Jedi and free the Chosen One from slavery, he approached Watto in order to make a deal. But in his mind, he wasn't going there just for Anakin. His goal was to free them both. Qui-Gon was a wise and powerful Jedi, but he never totally complied with what the Jedi Council or Jedi ever really wanted him to do. In his mind, he was ignoring the Jedi Code for what seemed like 100th time. As Qui-Gon bargained with Watto, Watto wanted more than he could offer. Millions of credits and more slaves to replace the two Skywalkers. It was way too much for what Qui-Gon was willing to do. But he was desperate and in love, and he would do anything to make sure he could free Shmi. He wasn't even thinking about the future and what the Council might think. Qui-Gon offered a roll of the dice. If Watto won, he would be given Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's lightsaber along with their ship. But if Qui-Gon won, Anakin and Shmi would be free. Watto agreed and rolled the dice. Qui-Gon manipulated his trajectory with the Force so that he would win. Although upset and demanding a reroll, Qui-Gon left Tatooine with Anakin and Shmi. As they arrive on Coruscant, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan and Anakin go to the Jedi Council. Introducing Anakin as the Chosen One, the entire council gasped. They didn't know what to say. Yoda spoke up, saying that it was unlikely and impossible. Qui-Gon explained to the council that his midi-chlorian count was the highest ever recorded. He was extremely passionate about Anakin, knowing that he would be the future to defeating the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. After multiple tests and Qui-Gon being persistent, the council agrees to let Qui-Gon train him under the rule that Obi-Wan takes Jedi trials right away. As Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan motion to leave the council chambers, Mace raises his hand for them to stop. He looks at Qui-Gon and asks him about his feelings. Qui-Gon was confused on what Master Windu meant, to which Mace explained that since he stood before them, his emotions and heart rate had been jumping and racing. Numerous times he tried to speed up the conversation so that it could be over faster. Qui-Gon denied these accusations, but Mace pried further and deeper into Qui-Gon's mind. Mace stated that another human was in his thoughts, a woman. Sensing the connection the two had, and finally discovering that it indeed was Anakin's mother, Shmi Skywalker. The council was in shock, and demanded Qui-Gon explain himself. There was no point in denying it, that would just make the situation even worse. Qui-Gon looked around the room before beginning to speak. He told the council he met and fell in love with Shmi, that she challenges him and makes him a better man. Qui-Gon expresses his feelings to the council and they listen, but they would not accept and welcome Shmi. Yoda said that on occasions Jedi were allowed to have attachments, like Ki-Adi-Mundi who had a family himself, but that was because his species were going extinct. They also said that if he were to train Anakin, having his mother around would interrupt his feelings, which is something they couldn't risk that with the Chosen One. The council finally finished, saying that Shmi must leave Coruscant for good and never see him or Anakin again. Qui-Gon immediately responded with hate, screaming at the Masters and cursing this decision. His emotions got the best of him in a way they never had before. But he was silenced as 4 Jedi Masters stood up and ignited their lightsabers. Realizing what he had done, Qui-Gon apologized for his outrage. This is what his love for Shmi had driven him to do. There was still an issue on Naboo which needed to be fixed, but not by Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan. 2 other Jedi would be sent in their absence. They left the council chambers to Qui-Gon being extremely upset. Obi-Wan tried to explain reasoning to him, but it was no use. Qui-Gon was upset, and so was Anakin. He had just been told that he could never see his mother again, and when they both went to her new apartment, she was already gone. The Jedi had talked with the Chancellor, who formally banished Shmi Skywalker from Coruscant. This was a disaster for the 2 Jedi. Qui-Gon vowed to Anakin that they would find her as they got into their ship and left to search for her. Meanwhile, the 2 Jedi, Shakti and Kit Fisto, were sent to Naboo to deal with Darth Maul. Although, when they encounter the ferocious Sith, they were both slaughtered. Maul's rage only amplified, and Naboo came under Separatist control. Maul left the planet and took Padme as his prisoner. Anakin and Qui-Gon were able to locate Shmi's whereabouts very quickly. She went back to Tatooine, the only place she truly felt like was her home. However, as they arrived on the planet and made their way to Shmi's location, she wasn't home. In the darkness emerged the Sith Lord Darth Maul. He had been sent there by Palpatine, who knew exactly where she was going, as he was the one who had told her to go there. Maul paraded the fact that he had won. Shmi began to cry and call out for her son and the man that she loved. Maul ignited his lightsaber and drove it through Shmi Skywalker's heart, killing her. Qui-Gon screamed and ignited his green lightsaber to rush Darth Maul. Swinging with all of his might, he was determined to destroy him. He didn't care what emotions rose from his body. He used the light and the dark. All of his training practicing restraint was forgotten in an instant as he fought with fury. Anakin cried and cried as he ran over to his mother and picked her body up, pleading that she wakes up. But it was no use, she was dead. He looked up to see Qui-Gon and Maul still fighting. Maul's aggression and ability with a lightsaber was far superior to Qui-Gon. He had been trained from birth in the art of the dark side. His only mission in life was to kill Jedi. As he continued to fight, he was able to find an opening in Qui-Gon's defenses and destroy his lightsaber before stabbing him in the heart, killing him. Qui-Gon and Shmi Skywalker are now dead, both killed through the heart from the same lightsaber. Anakin once again screamed, but this time in fear. Now he was all alone, with a crazy man. What would happen to him? His life was surely over. How could this have happened? This was all Palpatine's plan, and it had succeeded. When he learned that the Chosen One, with a higher midichlorian count than Yoda, had arrived on Coruscant, he knew the boy could become the perfect apprentice. He set a trap to kidnap the boy, and so Darth Maul walks over and greets Anakin before taking him aboard his ship. As Anakin is brought on board, he sees Padme tied up in the corner. It seems Maul had taken her hostage. Even though it had been a few months since Anakin had seen Padme, she was still the most beautiful girl the boy had ever seen. Maul flew them to Palpatine's private residence on Naboo, where they were both kept. For the next few days they just sat there, starving. Maul was told to leave them alone until further instruction. Palpatine arrives at his home to greet the 2 boys. They were both shocked to see that Chancellor Palpatine was the one behind all of this. He had been a noble man serving a lifetime in the Senate, but deep down he was a Sith Lord. Anakin didn't really know the Chancellor, but Padme, being the Queen of Naboo, knew exactly who he was.
Palpatine wanted to turn Anakin to the dark side, and this began with killing his mother in front of him. Palpatine brought Anakin out of his cage. Even though he was only 9 years old, Palpatine would show no restraint. He raised his fingers and blasted Sith lightning at the boy, charring his clothes and sending him straight to the floor, screaming in agony. The torture had only just begun. To turn someone to the dark side, you needed to rupture every single light side belief that they had built over their life. That began now. It took a while. Anakin and Padme were given little food and water. Padme would spend her days watching Anakin get tortured by Maul, who was loving every second of it. On numerous occasions he came close to killing the young boy, but held back. After 2 months of torturing Anakin, he would still not turn to the dark side, and Palpatine was starting to grow impatient. Meanwhile on Coruscant, the Jedi mourned Qui-Gon's death and assumed Anakin had been taken, since they never found his body. The entire council was extremely upset about their loss. Qui-Gon was deeply loved around the Jedi Temple, and now everyone knew he was dead. The Jedi knew that they had to find Anakin if he was still alive. They couldn't leave a being with such a high midi-chlorian count just sitting out in the galaxy God knows where. They began a search party for him, with Obi-Wan leading it. However, it was to no prevail, as they could never find Anakin again. As Palpatine arrived back at his palace on Naboo, he had decided he couldn't wait any longer and needed to turn Anakin to the dark side now. He pulled Padme from her cell, dragging her from her hair only. As Anakin screamed to let her go, Palpatine didn't listen. He began torturing her, firing the most powerful bolts of Force lightning he ever had. Padme cried the loudest scream. Palpatine granted her mercy when he ignited his lightsaber and sliced her head off, ending the suffering. Anakin was terrified and shocked. She had been kept alive for months to die in an instant like that. Palpatine commanded Maul to get Anakin and place him on the ship. They were going on a trip. As they all landed on Maul's homeworld of Dathomir, they all exited the ship. Walking towards their destination, the Night Sisters greeted them before taking them inside. Mother Talzin welcomed the Sith into her sanctuary once again. Palpatine hasn't been in years. The last time he would have came was when he came to pick up Maul from her. He wished to turn Anakin to the dark side, and she obliged to his wishes and began the spell. Anakin was placed on the table with Night Sisters and Mother Talzin surrounding him. She began to whisper her words of spells and enchantments before Anakin burst from the table and used the Force to call Palpatine's lightsaber from his sleeves, igniting them both. Palpatine smiled, finally an apprentice with anger and ambition. Thanking Mother Talzin, they left Dathomir, a very successful visit. For the next 10 years they would train Anakin. Palpatine took care and delicacy when training him, teaching him everything he knew about the Force. Maul would be a great apprentice for slaughtering Jedi, but Anakin was a true prodigy. He groomed him to one day take his place as Sith Lord. From Palpatine's training, Anakin learned Force Lightning, Force Choke, and just about every dark side ability you could think of. Due to his skill and talent in the Force, Anakin picked up everything extremely fast. Mastering the Force in only a few years, Anakin was the most powerful man in the galaxy. Now it was the 3rd year of the Clone Wars, and Palpatine had reached his moment where he would execute Order 66. After killing Mace Windu and the other Jedi who tried to kill him, he had the evidence he needed to ascend to the throne. Anakin and Maul flew to Coruscant after 10 years of waiting. Palpatine executed Order 66 as Anakin and Maul met up with thousands of clones. Anakin and Maul made their way up the steps to the Jedi Temple, clone troopers marching behind them and ready to fire. The Jedi were clueless to Anakin's existence and had almost completely forgotten about him, believing he was killed 10 years ago when they could never find him. But as they entered the temple and saw the Master stare at him, they immediately recognized and knew who he was. Clone troopers began firing at every corner of the temple, causing explosions and deaths. Anakin and Maul began slicing Jedi one by one. Anyone who walked in front of them were targets. To Anakin, it didn't matter the level of strength that they possessed, because he was far more powerful. Jedi who had been masters for decades couldn't last longer than 10 seconds against Anakin. His skill in the Force was unmatched against anyone in history. Anakin turned to see Obi-Wan. To him, he was just a shadow of his past, of when Anakin Skywalker was weak. Anakin began dueling Obi-Wan, who with his mastery of Form 3 fighting style was able to last a lot longer than the ordinary Jedi, even gaining a bit of ground against Anakin and pressuring him, but he was still out of his element. After a short while, Anakin cut both of his legs off and walked away, letting a random clone trooper come along and finish the job, killing Obi-Wan Kenobi for good. The temple burned to the ground. Any last remnants of the Jedi Order was over, and even more clones entered the Jedi Temple as they killed more Jedi. The younglings quickly fell to Maul's greedy grin. For his entire life he'd been dreaming of this moment, dreaming of slaughtering Jedi. He had finally been granted this wish. The Jedi Order collapsed for good that night. As Anakin and Maul stood in the center of the Jedi Temple, they were victorious. Every knight, Padawan and youngling on Coruscant was dead, with Jedi all over the galaxy falling to the clone army. Anakin turned to Maul and reignited his crimson blade. Maul was confused and then realized what was happening. Anakin was challenging him. Now that they had won, Maul was no use to them. Anakin rushed Maul and swung ferociously, not leaving any room for error. Even though they had just spent a better part of 10 years practicing and sparring together, Maul was not prepared for this. Anakin raised his hand before beating Maul with all of his strength. Quickly, he was able to disarm the Dathomir boy and slice both of his arms off before slowly decapitating him. His head fell to the floor as Palpatine walked in behind him. Congratulating Anakin, the two made their way back to Palpatine's office. After a millennia of hiding in the shadows, the Sith ruled the galaxy once again. The Empire rose and Anakin only grew more powerful. In time, he dethroned Palpatine and took the galaxy for himself, becoming the most violent and cruel dictator anyone had ever seen. He lived out his final days watching the world with hate. Anakin Skywalker took his final breath atop his throne, and then he was dead. Thank you guys for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of the story. I thought having Anakin turn to the dark side by Mother Talzin would make him even more powerful, and there was no room for any light side emotions. Even in time when her spell had worn off, he had committed so many actions full of hate that he was long gone to the dark side. The galaxy would also be completely ruined under Anakin's rule. He would have reached his full potential and just killed everyone. I always like to think that the full potential Anakin could choke people across planets and obliterate worlds. He would probably build dozens of Death Stars in his time and just rule everything. If you would like to support the channel, please consider becoming a member. The links are below. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and may the Force be with you.